Okay, hello everybody. How's everyone doing? I've been asked to just make an announcement, and if everyone can turn their phones off or put them on silent, that'd be great, just during the presentation. Okay, so I'm Bryon Bullock. I am Senior Sound Designer at the Creative Assembly, and this is my good friend Steve Whetman and co-presenter. He is an audio director and sound designer at Audiobeast. And we're here to talk Foley for games. Two games in particular, Alien Isolation, that's a game I worked on, and Gears of War Ultimate Edition, a game that Steve worked on. And we'll be diving into some techniques and systems behind the Foley in those games. And the idea is we want to get you guys thinking about what Foley can really bring to your games. Because sometimes Foley gets dropped to the bottom of the priority list, and some people think it's just a bit of footsteps or a bit of cloth. And it's so much more than that. It can bring so much more to a game. It can really ground objects in the world and make them feel real. So hopefully you'll agree with us at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to kick off with Alien Isolation. For those of you guys who haven't played AI, it's a first-person survival horror game set roughly 15 years after the events of Ridley Scott's original Alien film, masterpiece, some would say. And you play the daughter of Ellen Ripley, Amanda, who's in search of the flight recorder from her mother's ship, the Nostromo. And I've got a quick gameplay clip that I want to show to just give some context into some of the things I'm going to be talking about.
Samuels, I've made it to the hospital.
We're at the transit station outside medical reception. Ripley, we heard gunshots, and if we heard them, so did the creature. Good luck, Ripley. Hurry if you can.
So there was 4 key areas that we wanted to focus on when it came to the Foley in Alien Isolation. The first one being perspective. AI is a first-person game, so how do we use Foley to really put the player there in Amanda's shoes and sell that perspective? Detail. For me, one of the keys to creating natural, believable-sounding Foley is the amount of detail that you put into it. So all the different layers, but also detail in the way it plays back at runtime. Emotion, a bit strange to have Foley and emotion in the same sentence, but Alien Isolation is a survival horror game, and audio is key for creating suspense and tension. And how does the Foley fit into that? How can we use Foley to really drive that? And lastly, gameplay. Sound is a key gameplay component of Alien Isolation. The player is taught to listen to and be aware of how much sound they're making, because sound is one of the ways that the alien hunts the player down. It's one of its senses. So the player needs to be aware of how much sound they're making, be aware of the sound around them, and also use sound as a weapon and as a defense. And what does that really mean for the Foley? What responsibilities does the Foley have to communicate these key gameplay mechanics to the player? I'm going to elaborate on these as I go forward, starting with perspective. I've got a quick gameplay clip that I think shows how we use perspective in AI. I think that's a great example of how Foley can really communicate to the player a sense of perspective. In that example, we want to sell the feeling of being inside an EVA suit. So we want it to feel claustrophobic, suffocating. And we almost want to sell Amanda's state of mind at that moment. She's been ejected out of the station. She's frantically trying to get back to save her life. And the sound has to try and portray that state of mind. And one of the ways we do it is by using a mixture of real and hyperreal sound. Hyperreal sound is sound that's exaggerated for dramatic narrative effects. And some of the sound that's hyperreal in that example is the Foley. So all the movement as she's trying to grab stuff and as she's hitting the side of the ship and everything, that's all exaggerated for dramatic effect, to kind of sell her state of mind. That's a picture of our Foley artist, one of our Foley artists at Pinewood Studios in the UK. Andrea, she's wearing some of the props that contributed to creating the EVA suit sound in the game. She's wearing a hockey kit, so protective shorts, and there's like a padded chest piece and arm pieces, and an old school astronaut's helmet that was actually used in Prometheus. And I wanted just to go through some of the mic techniques because I think they show how different techniques can be used to capture different perspectives. The first one we used was a standard kind of Foley microphone. You can just about see it in the picture, the Sheps, which is a few feet away from the Foley artist. And that sounds a bit like this. So obviously when you listen to that, it's got the completely wrong perspective. It doesn't feel like you're inside the EVA suit. It doesn't feel like you're inside the helmet at all. So really that was just a safety mic for us. The next one we put up was actually a binaural microphone. So Andrea wears a binaural set in her ears, and then the helmet goes over the top, and she performs her moves, and we capture that, which sounds a bit like this.
I've all steamed up. Medium coming up.
So obviously straight away that feels like you're inside the spacesuit, you're inside the helmet. These are the raw recordings, by the way, before any kind of processing or any cleaning up or anything like that. And straight away that gives you the sense of being there. It's got this kind of nice stereo image and sounds, it's got the right perspective we're after. But we also added contact mic recordings, so we put contact mics under Andrea's clothing, and that kind of picks up the vibrations and gives kind of weight to the sound, which sounds a bit like this.
Medium coming up.
So obviously on its own that would be pretty useless, but it actually works as a layer in the sound to give weight, to make it feel like you're actually carrying that huge suit around with you. And we also used something that we named a resonance mic. So this is basically when you put a microphone inside an object to capture its resonance. The object that we used in in AI was a big metal box. So this goes next to the Foley artist, and we put a DPA microphone inside a little miniature microphone, and it picks up her footsteps. And it sounds a bit like this. So straight away, that's got the right sort of space. It feels like you're there. It's kind of a little bit internal. And it's a great thing to layer into the footsteps in general. We used this on all the footsteps in the game because it gives you the feeling of the kind of corridors resonating around you, which is a great tool. And that kind of brings me on to layering, because it's very rare that you get Foley tracks back from the stage or stuff you've recorded yourself, and that can just go straight into the game. You always need to be layering this stuff up. Foley's all about layers and creating detail and depth. Some of the things that we layered into the sound was stuff like mic distortion. That's where you grab a microphone, just be rough with it and cover the diaphragm. So obviously don't do that with your own mics. Use it, do someone else's. We used that for all the side, like when you hit the side of the ship or when she's going to try and grab something. It's a layer. It's kind of visceral and gives this kind of violent edge to it. We also put the Shep's mic inside the helmet when Andrea had finished her moves, and we just started hitting the helmet, and we got stuff like this. So again, that's a great layer to add movements as you're moving around, as you're turning in the game and everything. It sounds like the helmet's moving around with you. So that was a great layer. And we recorded other plastic props and rattles and impacts. We recorded stuff for the visor cracking and the breathing apparatus that goes on the back of the helmet. All these layers contribute to creating the overall sound. Just a quick one on processing as well, because I think it's very rare that you get tracks back. I mean, you heard the raw tracks a minute ago. They always need a bit of processing, even if it's a bit of cleaning up. So stuff that we did was things like compression, declicking. So RX4 declicker is absolutely brilliant, gets rid of all the horrible little clicks and pops. Transient designing as well. So using a transient processor helps to create perspective. So as the sound gets closer to you, you can increase the transients, and it feels like it's getting closer. And if it's going further away, you can push them away, which is a great little trick. Obviously, low-frequency enhancement, low air, multi-band saturation, so tape saturation, not like guitar distortion, pitch shifting, and also we recorded the IR of the helmet so that we could put the other props in the same space and make it feel like it was in the same perspective. So, moving on to detail. So why is it so important for us to add quite a lot of detail to the Foley in AI? Well, first of all, there was purposely in AI quite a high dynamic range. So there's moments when there's explosions going off and there's music pumping and things like that. But 70% of the time it's you just creeping through these dark corridors. It's quite quiet at those moments, and all you hear is your Foley, maybe the sound of your breathing and the corridors creaking around you. And at that moment, the Foley's really exposed. And because the players taught to listen to how much sound they're making, it's kind of amped up as well. So we had to put a lot of detail into the amount of Foley we recorded. So take Andrea, Amanda, she's got obviously her footsteps, all the different materials, but she's also got her leg Foley, her torso Foley. She's wearing dog tags, so we record dog tags. She's got a backpack on. She's got a tool belt, equipment, weapons. All this stuff's recorded and layered together to create the sound. But we also put a lot of detail into the way that plays back, because you can have the most amazing sounding content, but if it plays back in an unbelievable way, unnatural way, the end result's going to be wooden and take you out of that immersion. Good Foley's all about natural, believable sounding movement. So some of the systems we used in AI for the Foley, I mean, most of you guys probably know these. This is kind of standard stuff. We had code-driven Foley for the footsteps. So there's a little bit of code that detects on collision between your foot and the world, what kind of footstep that was, whether you're running, walking, turning, what kind of material it was. And that's passed into Wise, and we play the appropriate sound. We also have kind of animation tagged Foley. This was really only used for animations where the timing was going to be the same every time. So reloading a weapon or picking up a cup, generally the animations are always the same timing, so we could do some bespoke Foley for that. So we had this stuff, but it kind of lacked detail and depth, and importantly, it didn't react to the player's input very well. So there was moments where you're moving and the Foley wasn't reacting, it wasn't feeling natural. So we had to add other layers to it. And one of the things we did was create something called dynamic Foley. which is something that a colleague of mine, James McGee, and I developed at Creative Assembly. We added context-sensitive mixing, so obviously you can't expect the Foley to be the right level. You just set the levels and then it's okay. You have to kind of mix it based on what's happening in the game or what's happening to the player. And also a mastering chain to bring everything together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about dynamic Foley. What is it? So it's kind of a system that takes Foley assets and mixes them live at runtime based on movement data from the game. So we track things like acceleration and velocity, and this is for the player, and we're kind of trying to treat the Foley system a bit like a virtual Foley artist in some crude way. So I've got an example of the Foley system at work. This is all of the systems working together. The dynamic Foley is the stuff where she's turning, where she's walking forward, all the kind of movement sounds are done live based on the movement data. So that's a quick example of that at work. So how do we do it? So we're tracking acceleration and velocity for the player, and there's a couple of rules that we can kind of say. When there's a quick change in acceleration, there's generally a sudden camera movement. A slow change in acceleration, the player's turning slowly. The player, if it's a low player velocity, they're moving through the world slowly. And the other way around, if it's a quick velocity, they're traversing through the world quite quickly. And that data comes into WYs as RTPCs, and then we use the actual footsteps system as a trigger, so like an impulse into the dynamic Foley system. And then we blend and mix between different layers of Foley to create the movement sounds. So that's really tightly synced to the player's input. We also have a continuous switch system that basically tracks the turning of the player, so the acceleration changes. And then that can play different Foley assets to really create that tight synchronization between the player and their movement, which is really important. So this stuff was great. It kind of created fluid-sounding Foley that reacted to the player's input. It allowed us to create detail and depth, and it meant we weren't so reliant on the animation department. I mean, we were for the tagged stuff, but generally all our movement Foley was done using dynamic Foley. And it opened up loads of new possibilities. Like, there was a good example is the flamethrower. There's a little pilot light on the flamethrower, and as you move it, we can track that movement data, and we can mix different flame assets to make it feel like that flame's moving through the world. Another example is the fuel canister, which has like a liquid in it. As you're moving around, we can play different Foley assets of the fuel moving around. And it opened up loads of possibilities for us, which was great. I'm going to do that more, I think, in our next games. So, moving on to emotion. I wanted to kind of quote Alfred Hitchcock, who once said, "There's no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it." And I think that sums up horror in one sentence really well. It's all about the suspense and the tension before the moment. And I think sound is a key tool in doing that. We're great at creating suspense and tension, driving emotion. And one of the ways we do that with Foley is by using off-screen sounds. That really helps put the player on edge. When you hear something but you don't see it straight away, it puts you on edge. And that's one of the great things about sound. It's not confined by what the camera is showing the player. It can tell you what's happening on the other side of a wall or above you or down the other end of a dark corridor. You don't have to be seeing it. It can tell that wider story, which is great. So some examples of off-screen sounds that we used in AI was the alien in the vent movement. This sounds a bit like this. So as soon as we put that sound into the game, it transformed the way people played it. It straight away gave the alien this presence, and you had to be aware of what you were doing and how much sound you were making. And it's kind of like the film. In the film, the alien doesn't have this huge kind of presence on the camera. You don't see it that much, but you always feel like it could come down at any moment and kill someone. And this kind of did a similar thing for us. It made the player aware of what they were doing. They had to be aware quite quite considerably. And importantly, it kind of added to the suspense and the tension. It kind of created suspense and tension for us, and it changed the way people were playing the game, which was great. The next sound was the alien leaving the vents. So again, that sounds a bit like this. So when you hear that sound, it amps up the tension again to the next level, because you know he's come down from the vents and he's on the same level. He's come to investigate something. And again, it raises the tension, which is great. And it's just an off-screen sound. You don't generally see the alien leaving the vents unless you're really unlucky. It's actually an off-screen sound that raises the tension, which is great. And next, the alien footsteps. The footsteps are just another way of increasing the tension. Generally, you're probably hiding under a table at this point, and you're just hearing the footsteps, da-dum, 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 getting closer to you. And that raises the tension level even more because you're not seeing it, which is great. And they're just footsteps, nothing massively special. When you put them all together, they sound a bit like this. And you're dead. So that put it together and it kind of works, which is nice. So summing up, think about perspective in your games. There's lots of different perspectives, first person, third person, there's more than that. Think about how you're capturing your Foley and using Foley to sell that perspective. Detail, think about how much detail you're putting into your Foley, but also how it plays back in the game, because again, if you have the best sounding Foley in the world, but if it plays back in an unbelievable way, then the result's going to be wooden and unrealistic. Emotion, how do you want your player to feel? Sound designers were great at driving emotion, and Foley can be done to do that. And gameplay, what do you want to communicate to your player? That's what responsibilities does the Foley have to communicate key gameplay mechanics? That's quite an important one. So that's enough for me. I think I've been talking for about 20 odd minutes. So I'm going to bring Steve on, who's going to talk about all the great work that him and his team did on Gears of War Ultimate Edition. We come back for questions at the end. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Byron. Hi, folks. My name is Steve Whetman, and I'm a freelance audio director and sound designer. I have my own audio provider company called Audiobeast, and I'm based at Pinewood Studios near London. Before that, I was head of audio at Splash Damage and directed the audio for Gears of War Ultimate Edition on Xbox One. Today, I'm going to be showing you how my team created all the Foley for Gears of War, and I'm going to kick off with a little video, just in case there's some of you who are unfamiliar with the series.
For a time, the humans of Serra knew the illusion of peace. Until Emergence Day. In time, their valiant defense was crushed, with billions dead. Humans denied their enemy control. By destroying their own civilization. Now, the long struggle against overwhelming odds approaches a final, desperate stand.
So, to give you some background on the project, Gears of War originally shipped on 360 back in November 2006. It introduced a number of innovative gameplay features. It was the first game I played on 360, and I absolutely loved it, so it was a huge honor to work on the franchise. The Coalition in Vancouver and Splash Damage in London worked together on the project, and we worked with Pinewood Studios on the Foley. The Coalition's main focus was the cinematics, while Splash Damage handled the art and the audio, although in practice, actually there was a lot more collaboration than that, with both teams working very closely together. In order to preserve the original gameplay 100%, we used the version of Unreal 3 and the entire Gears of War project exactly as it shipped back in 2006. We did make some upgrades to the engine, though, to make Gears sound more awesome for Xbox One. There's a big difference between audio for games in 2006 and 2015, so we made some changes to the engine there. The goal was not to just release a simple HD up-res, but to completely remake the audio in 7.1. So the cinematics were remade entirely from scratch in 7.1, and the music was mixed in 7.1 from the original recording sessions. All the weapons were remade from scratch in 7.1 as well. So when you fire a weapon, there's bespoke content for all 8 channels, and the gun tails fill the environment and sound really rich. The only aspect of audio we didn't touch was the speech, as the original source material was still in great shape. So when we started the project, I went back and played the original 360 game, and I knew that we needed to replace all of the Foley. So the most important character to establish first was Marcus Fenix. Marcus is a huge dude, so obviously we wanted to sound really huge. Next was General Ram. He's the military leader of the Locust and the final boss. And he's even bigger than Marcus, so he needed to have more weight in his Foley. Then I'll talk about the Brumac, a massive creature with a Troika gun platform on its back for a Locust gunner and missile launchers. Next, we'll take a quick look at my favorite creature, the Cedar. The Cedar is a gross monster that bursts through the ground and spits living bombs at you called Nemesists. And the Foley artist we worked with at Pinewood was the legendary Peter Burgess, who's worked on many games and films. He's done Foley for all of the Harry Potter films, Quantum of Solace, Batman Begins, Captain Phillips, and loads more. So, to go into some more detail, Marcus Fenix, we wanted Marcus to sound huge with lots of metal for his armor, but not loose and clanky. We wanted his armor and moves to be precise and deliberate, almost compact, like all the plates of armor on his body are shifting and moving in sync. And for his moves, we used layers of old leather and metal, which Peter crashed against his body to create the texture and weight for all of Marcus's animations. For his footsteps, we wanted big, but actually most of the weight comes from his moves, with footsteps just providing a bit of information about the surface he's on. Here's a video showing Marcus's Foley.
Guts. Just another day on the job. Bring it. Bring it!
So in the bag, in the leather bag, Peter's actually got lots of props inside the bag. So there's bits of metal scaffolding and other things to give the bag weight. So when he crashes it against his body, it sounds really big. So we recorded with 3 mics into a classic British Trident console, and then tracked into Pro Tools. We used an MKH-40, a 60, and a Schoeps CMC-6 with an MK4 cardioid capsule. The 40 was positioned closest, with the 60 further back as a safety, And the Chopes, while sounding great, was a little bit too delicate, whereas the 40 captures the most mid and low end. So for most of our takes, that's the mic we chose, the 40. I did quite a lot of processing to get Marcus to sound huge. His moves were all doubled and pitched down an octave, and there was lots of EQ, compression, low air. The source material, though, was recorded really well, so it could withstand quite a lot of processing without sounding artificial. It was imperative for him to sound natural and in the world, rather than sci-fi or robotic in any way. For Ram, his moves and footsteps needed to be bigger than Marcus. So for his moves, Peter smashed the props into a leather jacket actually on the ground, and doing it this way, he was able to get a lot more force into the moves than if he wore the props himself. You fight Ram at the end of the campaign on a train, so we needed giant metal footsteps for this. We created a second set of footsteps with more surface materials for multiplayer, where the loudness and attenuation was adjusted to be more appropriate for competitive play. For the single-player metal footsteps, we used a metal grate suspended over an earth pit, and also placed metal containers with mics in near the grate to capture extra resonances. And here's a video of some of Ram's Foley. We wanted Marcus and Ram to sound huge, with a very focused amount of metal armor rattle, but of course we needed to go much bigger when it came to the Brumac. For this special creature's footsteps, we set up the mics as usual, but we added a DPA 4021 wrapped in foam, buried in the earth pit to pick up extra low frequencies. Just walking on the earth pit wasn't big enough, so we used boxing gloves to pummel the earth. For the Brumac's moves, we used leather and metal as before, and added an extra layer of weapons being smacked against each other. During the processing stage, we added rock smashes and debris to give him even more impact. Death to the microphone.
And I thought the food in prison smelled bad.
So let's have a quick look at the processing I did for the Brumac. For the footsteps, we did lots of processing, not so much for the moves. There was lots of doubling, pitching things down by an octave. First of all, here's the footsteps on the top 9 tracks. There's lots of rock smashes and debris layers, a dedicated LFE layer, as well as the boxing glove impacts. The first rock impact track has these plugins on. First, an EQ to correct a couple of problematic areas. Then a transient modulator to give weight and cut high transients. Then max bass and a multiband compressor, all to give more weight. We chose max bass here rather than low air because we already had an LFE layer going to the 0.1, so the max bass helped fill the low mid-range. The boxing glove impacts have a similar set of plugins with a slightly different EQ and a limiter at the end. And the mastering was pretty simple. A multi-band compressor, which was set up to bypass the mids, so they just went straight through, while the bass and treble were compressed. And then just a simple limiter to catch the peaks. I quite like the L1 for this still, even though it's a very old limiter, because it's just great for catching tiny peaks without doing any other multi-band work. So next, a quick look at how we built the sound of my favorite creature, the cedar. The cedar has very tough skin, so for that layer we used thick rubber Undertaker gloves filled with pistachio nuts for added crunch. For the slime layer we used several watermelons. For the footsteps we used leather gloves with seashells taped to them on concrete. And for the armor and body moves we used a plate of body armor, crushing dry dog food and cereal. This was really a lot of fun to work on, and I think it really shows how you can think of Foley as live sound design, where you're building up layers of texture to get a really big sound. So I've got a little video of one of the cedar's death animations broken down into the component layers.
Piece of shit.
Right, so we've got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to show you some pictures from the sessions and hit you with as much information as I can. Here's the old Trident desk that Glenn Gaffard has at Pinewood. You can't see them, but over on the left there's a Grace preamp, which is a great piece of kit for recording very, very high frequencies. It records up to something like 150 kilohertz. I think it actually goes a lot higher, but that's what's stated in the literature. The Grace preamp is great for pairing with the Sanken CO100, and that captures very high frequencies, so when you're pitching things down, you get a lot of high frequencies being revealed that were previously inaudible. The desk, although very old, has a great characterful EQ, and it's got a really great sound to it. And Glenn loves to get stuck in and blur the lines between Foley and sound design, so he's not afraid to use processors inline while recording, like transmods, pitch shifters, and compressors. You might think that that's a bit risky, and for some material, for sure, it is. If you're working on a film like Steve Jobs, for example, which is a lot of walking and talking, you wouldn't do that sort of thing. But for a project like this, yeah, just go for it. Make yourself a record list on actual paper. Sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of people forget to do it, and a Foley artist like Peter Burgess can hammer through a lot of material extremely quickly, so you want to have a lot of backup material to record in case you finish early. Ideally also prepare a Pro Tools session with videos and markers for all your animations, so that in the session there's no wasted time putting markers in and dropping videos on the timeline. And here's one of the prop rooms at Pinewood, where every object is basically a different texture waiting to be performed. Consider dipping into the props room as searching your library on your hard drive. It's no different. You're looking for an object that can produce a particular timbre, texture, and rhythm. And the only difference is, obviously, one is committed to media already, and one isn't. Whilst at Pinewood, I found these bizarre, exotic materials. And here's the mic setup we used for quite a lot of the recording. There's the Chopes on the left, the MKH60 in the middle, and the 40 on the right. And here's one of the gloves we used for the Cedar's talons. We also used a similar setup for the wretches as they scurry about. And after a session doing the wedges, the shells kind of end up looking a bit destroyed. Here's a closer look at the solid metal surface with the container next to it, which we used for extra metal resonances. It was the DPA 4021 in the container, while we used an AKG C414, a 40 and a 60. Gun sound design on gears is beyond the scope of this talk, but here's Peter doing the Foley for the Brumac with a revolver and an old machine gun. He finds a place where the two props can be in contact, and while giving the biggest sound, effectively what's happening is the revolver, while providing some sound itself, is causing the machine gun to resonate and rattle, and Peter has the setup resting on the wood pit, which is creating extra resonances and depth as well. And here's Pete performing the sound for the Nemesists, which are the living bombs that the Cedar spits at you. He's doing it with a vibrating back massager, and he's rubbing it around on an old army helmet. Here's the setup for the Lancer assault rifle, which is the iconic chainsaw gun in Gears of War. A metal door bolt is attached to some wood, and just by itself, it's literally just a door bolt and nothing particularly special about it. But placing it on an SA-80 assault rifle means that you get the resonance of the gun coming through, so suddenly it sounds like the bolt of a weapon. And that's placed on two metal boxes as well to give even more resonances and give the sound more weight. And here's something we used for the Lancer chainsaw teeth. Just by itself, the spinning cog doesn't make much noise, but putting it on the metal box makes the texture much thicker. So just some final notes before we go into some questions. Try not to think of Foley as just footsteps. Think of it as live sound design, where you can build up your layers to get a really big sound. Review frequently and do a little bit of processing in the session to see if the material is going to work. Sometimes you're in a session and you know that something's just going to work right away, but sometimes you need a lot of iteration and experimentation. And so being able to do your processing whilst you're at the session is really helpful. And don't think that you have to go somewhere to get good Foley. Of course, a team like the Pinewood team are going to always do a great job, but just get stuck in yourself. It's extremely fun and rewarding, and you can get really creative with it. So, thank you very much for listening. I should say thanks to the team at the Coalition and Splash Damage. I think Crispin is here somewhere, maybe. But thanks a lot for all the help on Gears of War. Any questions?
Hi, great talk. For Gears, how much are you relying on the Foley artist, Peter, to come up with those material choices? Are you really leaning on his expertise, or are you feeding him ideas?
So you're asking about how much the Foley artist will pick the props for
exactly.
sound? Yeah. Well, someone like Peter will instinctively just grab props that he knows will fit together. So when you watch him work, it's very interesting, because you're looking at him picking up these props and you're thinking, how is this ever going to sound like, you know, the Brumac or the Cedar? And once you hear it all put together, suddenly it's like you've made this massive thing out of what actually are very, very small objects. So you just kind of have to trust that the Foley artist is going to pick good props.
Are you giving him concept art or video, or are you just describing the weapons to him, what he needs?
We had mainly animations, which were from the original 2006 release. So they kind of look a little bit sketchy in the presentation. But yeah, we would play them animations, and Peter would just look at it and then pick stuff up, and without really any rehearsal, he'll just do it all pretty much in sync. And he's very consistent about how much lag there is. It's usually like 2 or 3 frames behind if you're shooting at 30 frames a second. So it's kind of like sight reading music. He's just able to predict what's going to happen and the size of a thing as he's performing it, and it's really quite impressive.
Great.
Hi, great talk. I was curious about the preamp that you mentioned to capture the high frequencies. So how would that differ from, for example, a Sound Devices recorder?
Well, the Grace preamp records up to something like 150 kilohertz, so there's a lot of content there where if you use it with something like a Sanken CO100 mic, which also records a lot of very high frequencies. Stuff that you can't hear, like well above the range of human hearing. So once you pitch it down, it starts to reveal all of that content, and it works really well for creatures, vocalizations, and other monster sounds. And yeah, it's really worth experimenting with.
My reason for asking is because with using the CO100, which I do in the Sound Devices now, I still pick up a lot of high frequencies that pitch down really well. So would it add even more if I change the preamp to that one as well? Okay.
A lot.
Okay, thanks.
My question is for Bryon. I played Alien Isolation, and it became one of my favorite games I've ever played. I've never been so scared in my life. I mean, I would be hiding in a thing, and I would wait for the alien to go away, and he just never would, and he would just be running around. I got to the point playing the game where the audio became such a clue for me. I was using the audio cues, and I was using the motion tracker and everything. Yeah. And there's a point later in the game, not to spoiler alert here, but you go down and you're in this alien thing, and all of a sudden all your audio cues go away because there's this loud alarm going off, and there's all the little face huggers running around. You can't hear them anymore because you used to hear them scuttling, and that kind of gave you a clue to be careful. But you couldn't hear anything anymore, and everything was just bombarding me, and I felt like I should just hide in a corner. And my question was, how much of that did they come to you as the audio artist ahead of time and say, hey, this is the effect that we really want to have, or did it just kind of happen when they started having all these things happen? Because to me, that was one of the most powerful parts of the game, where I really felt the most helpless because I lost all my audio cues for what to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We worked really closely with all of the team, so programmers, game designers, really closely, because sound is such an integral part of playing that game. So yeah, you can kind of change things up, which is pretty cool. So once people are relying on something, if you start to change things up, it puts them on edge. Like clearly, like you've lost all the stuff that you're relying on. So we did do that, and we would put sounds into the soundscape as well that would sound a little bit like the Alien, for example, like things like some screeches into doors opening and stuff like that. And again, that's kind of playing around with the player, which is great. Yeah. Because once you've got them conditioned to something, then you can start playing around with that, which is really interesting.
Good job. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Hi, my question is for Bryon. How did you guys manage your dynamic Foley system against the keyframed events?
Against the what, sorry?
The keyframed events. So like they didn't overlap and kind of turn into mush. So you're talking about the manage it with the tagged Foley? Yeah, so if like you've got this physics-driven system that does a whole bunch of automatic stuff, and then you go up and you want to have like a specific animation play in a
generally they didn't really overlap because all of our movement-based stuff was done dynamically. The only other things that you would really be doing, mainly, I think, reloads, for example. We would sometimes set duckers up and stuff like that. It got quite complicated in the end, but the mixture of the two kind of just worked together nicely, I think.
Cool. One other question for both of you guys is how granular do you get when you're going into the Foley studio with like this full animation list? And it seemed like just from the footage you were showing, Steve, it was mostly like walk cycles and run cycles. But do you go with like 100 videos of all the individual animations, or are you just kind of covering a few key things?
I think as much material as possible is really, really helpful. We'd send pictures of all the different type of clothing, all the different types of surfaces, as much information as possible, so then that they can work things out ahead of time. But still, you're always playing around anyway, on the stage anyway, so you're playing around with props and things all the time.
For example, they have not just one wood surface at Pinewood, they have 3 plus some other they have a stair surface that's wood as well. So If you just go and say, yeah, I want wood footsteps, that's great, but do you want old and creaky? Do you want new? Do you want decking? Or do you want loose wood? So yeah, you take as much detail as you can, as much detailed footage and pictures.
Yeah.
So you guys had dependencies from environment art and character art and all the props that you needed to get locked in before you went, and all that stuff was prepared before.
Yeah, it takes a long time to prepare that stuff, so you start early.
Cool, thank you.
No problem.
Hi, my name is Michael Surhas. I'm the community manager and voice actor for Insurgency, which is created by New World Interactive. We recently opened up a studio, and we're going to be on our next project working on creating an immersive story mode and reworking all the audio of our current game, Insurgency. And we want to create a Foley studio. So my question is very general for the both of you, but in regards to an independent studio just setting itself up, setting up a Foley stage or room in studio, what might you recommend in regards to starter equipment and just general tips?
So that's a big one, yeah, because somewhere like Pinewood just has so many props, and that's one of the best things for me about it. Is it's like a playground, and you can't kind of generate all that stuff, or you don't have that stuff in the studio, which is one of the reasons why we go there, definitely, but as well, all the experience that those guys have. But yeah, it is like a playground, so I think it's build up your prop store, definitely. A few different types of mics and stuff. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, just start going to jumbles and junk shops and just start picking up as much stuff as you can. Like even if it looks like junk, just get as many props as you can and just start building that up.
Very good, thank you.
Hey guys, that was really informative and good. I did have a question similar to a question that was asked earlier regarding the dynamic range of the games. Both of them would probably apply to this. With respect to dynamic range, did you guys have any sort of like level of detail implementations for the Foley sounds that were being made by the creatures? Maybe when they're closer, the mix changes of those sounds or anything like that? And if so, did you have any specific challenges that were hard to deal with or made that experience that much better or worse? So
you're talking about kind of mixing Foley, I guess.
Yeah.
In
the game.
I suppose it's slightly off topic. It's a kind of a presentation on its own. In Alien, we mixed the game based on the context of the player. So there was values like stealth and threat, and we would change the mix based on those values. So you can imagine the players hiding under a desk, and as the alien comes closer, the threat level is kind of increasing. There was lots of different values that went into threat, but that was the general gist. And when that happens, we can kind of drop out the ambience and things that aren't important and kind of create focus between the things that are important, but things like you and the alien. And we can even turn up the Foley in that case, because you're saying, like, I don't want to make any noise. We turn up the Foley, you're like, oh, she's making noise. It's that kind of thing you can play around with, which was cool. Did that else? Anything to add to that?
No, it's cool.
Okay.
Hi. I don't really know if you guys mentioned earlier or not, but I was wondering what sample rate and bit depth do you guys use for the Foley recording session?
I suppose it kind of depends. Well, I always tend to record at the highest possible sample rate, just for pitching purposes. But that's generally what I do.
All the gear stuff was 96, except for a few specific things we did at 192 when we knew we wanted to do very extreme pitch shifting. But generally, 96 is totally fine. And for a lot of film and TV work, that's often just 48, if you know that you're not going to be doing any pitch shifting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
One more for me, because there's time. For Alien, for those vent sounds you showed, is that baked in perspective, or is there an occlusion system happening there, and how does that work?
Sorry,
the alien vent sounds.
Oh, the alien in the vent.
Is the perspective baked in, or is there...
So the movement above, yes, so that's generally just Hayden, one of our sound designers at work, just banging some venting together, old venting, and then put through an IR that's from another room. So I don't know, the impulse could be downstairs and the source upstairs, and then a bit of clever EQ and stuff, really, to make it feel like it's above you. That's about it, really.
Is it actually tracking
It tracks its movement, yeah, definitely. So there is something up there.
Yeah.
There is a backstage, they call it Alien, that's up there. So it does track positional information, and it will occlude and get attenuate as it gets further away and stuff like that. But we didn't want to be massively realistic with that because it's an important sound that really builds tension and suspense. We wouldn't want it to completely go away all the time, for example.
So there's two aliens. There's the alien whenever you see it, and then when your gadget's tracking the alien, it's like
exactly, because you need to see it on the motion tracker as well.
Right.
So it is still up there. It doesn't disappear. It is actually in the vent system above you. Yeah.
Neat.
No problem.
Okay.
That's about it.
Yeah, it looks like there's no more questions. Thank you very much for coming, guys. And if anybody wants to come and check out the Foley studio at Pinewood, if you're ever in London, just give me a shout.
Thanks very much.